City Scramble is quite the appropriate translation for the title of RE0's 59th episode. It's a scramble in the sense of a lot of hurried and chaotic moving parts as the four strike teams attack the four towers, Otto and Felt rove through the city towards their own purposes, and the rest buckle down to defend themselves in the government building before this free-for-all gets underway. But it's also scrambled in the sense of plans already in disarray, as unexpected developments put a smooth resolution beyond reach almost as soon as the attacks begin. Hi folks, I'm Theta, and I'm continuing my anime-only coverage of Season 3. We do live watch and discussion streams on Wednesday when new episodes release, chat about it in Discord all week, and then I synthesize our conversations into these videos. Most of us don't know and don't want to know information from the source, so please keep source details out of the comments as well. Thank you. Now then, while the fighting and plans are scrambled, the alliance between the five candidates may also be in disarray, as Priscilla has sniffed out that Anastasia is concealing something from the others. We've suspected as much ever since she looked thoughtful in response to Subaru declaring that hiding information would only help their enemies 3 episodes ago. But in a separate instance, Priscilla also reveals that someone other than the cultists has been killing off the Council of 10. Whoever this party is, their aim appears to be to deny the cultists the witch's remains in an indirect way, erasing anyone who could show them the location. Perhaps deprived of this information, the archbishops would lose their reason to stay in the city, and so depart without the need to drive them out by force. Now that it's clear Anastasia has something she doesn't want known, the specter is raised of her orchestrating the murder of civilians, and surely the others would cease cooperating with her faction if they suspected as much. However, the reason Priscilla and Anastasia were even talking about keeping secrets was first in reference to Al. Anastasia wants to borrow him to help guard the building where she and the wounded are holed up, and Priscilla believes she has no need of him in her assault, proclaiming him a mere jester. But Liliana learns to her fright that Priscilla does not actually trust Al, and so she joins the audience in finding him just about the most suspicious person around, knowing things about witches and archbishops, ducking out of their assaults to look for his princess, but actually killing cultists where no one could see, and generally giving the impression of someone with a long habit of keeping his head down and face hidden. He seems more opposed than anyone to a direct confrontation with the witch's cult, and so we should probably consider him a leading suspect for the murder of the council members. This does presuppose murder, and not that they are otherwise unable to be reached. Even without Priscilla's knowledge or consent of Al doing this, if it's him, a revelation like that would shatter trust between the candidates. I thought Otto originally seemed a bit paranoid to keep the tone to himself all this time, but now his caution seems merited. Things aren't actually falling apart yet, since no one knows the full picture, but a fracture between their parties now seems likely before the actual hard work of fighting archbishops begins. Now, as this episode is the first back after a break, it's a good time to check in with everyone in their new locations and conflicts, and so we will do the same, one archbishop at a time. The various battle pairings are not necessarily arranged by effectiveness, as Priscilla chose her own target, and Wilhelm conspired with Subaru to keep Reinhard away from Coppola, where he knows that Heresia awaits. However, it turns out each matchup has some sort of personal stakes for one of those involved, even if they didn't know so initially. Sirius, Archbishop of Wrath, we will talk about first. This is who Priscilla chose, trusting that Liliana's powerful music would counter the troublesome authority. But perhaps she also chose Sirius for Liliana's sake. The reveal of murdered or indisposed council members came up because she wanted to reassure Liliana that Kiritaka was still alive. The cultists need the information he has, so it would make little sense to kill him. Sirius was the one we saw assault his muse company, and so perhaps her tower is also where he is being held. I don't know if or how Priscilla could know that, so maybe it's coincidence. But this season, so far, it's painted a picture of Priscilla as someone far less capricious than she at first appeared. She now seems instead like a woman who'd be great to have as an ally, but terrible to have as an enemy. In that new light, I can believe she intends to find and free Kiritaka to put Liliana at ease. This encounter is also the shortest, as Sirius gets just enough screen time to remind us what she and her wrath flames look like, along with her speech habit of constant thanking and apologizing. Let's visit Coppola next, or at least where she was supposed to be. This abomination on the wall ends up being a decoy, but I wonder if the giant sacks of fleshy grossness are part of how the decoy functions, or if it's just something grotesque she whipped up for fun, amusing herself with the thought of attackers repulsed by her handiwork. It serves its purpose either way, as Wilhelm and Garfield are engaged by the corpse soldiers before they have much time to get a closer look. Wilhelm does give a heads up concerning the identity of the woman beneath the cultist robes, and fills in a little information for us at the same time. He had encountered corpse soldiers earlier in his life, as we heard him relate to Subaru, during the Demi-Human War, where he also learned Teresia's identity after she saved him. As such, he is our resident expert. He told Subaru he expected his wife to seek him out, and now he tells Garfield that they're playing with her body as if it were a toy, forcing her to raise a blade against those she once tried to protect. This suggests that some part of the original person's personality remains behind, but nothing of their actual will. Certainly when we see Teresia's eyes, they appear rather blank, which may be some comfort for Wilhelm, who is now tasked with killing his wife. But that would have been far easier to bear had she remained shrouded by the hood. It's interesting to find her looking so young, not much different from the girl we originally saw in his memories. Does the corpse soldier magic explain this appearance, bringing forth a body returned to its peak condition? Or perhaps the Master Swordsman power preserves its bearer's youth, as that would certainly be another advantage in combat. I'm not sure it makes any difference to the situation, though if she did look older at death, then maybe Wilhelm is taking a little extra psychic damage from fighting a version of her that looks like she did when they first wed. I'm mostly just curious whether the corpse soldier process is behind her appearance, or if she really looked like this when she was already a grandmother. It's not like there's anything fair about the Master Swordsman power, as we will see in a later fight. For now, neither Teresia nor Wilhelm seems to have much advantage over the other, which is more than we can say for the other matchup. Even without Wilhelm's earlier comments, we could probably infer that our 8-armed friend retained some of his original's personality due to his first action when Garfield attacks. He plunges 2 of his swords into the ground and puts a set of hands behind his back. He is taunting Garf, demonstrating that he will not need his full strength to face him, and the message is received loud and clear. For the moment, it does not seem to be false bravado, as Kurgan is getting the better of him, prompting a familiar vampiric face to show up and offer a taunting look of her own. For Garfield, this is worse than just the possibility of defeat, as he has a lot of his identity bound up in being strong. Fighting is all he can do, so he puts it, and it's true that he isn't clever like Otto, doesn't inspire others like Subaru, and can't perform the kind of magical acts that Emilia and Betty can manage. His role, as he sees it, is just to be a strong fighter, and so a situation where he feels weak creates a crisis of self. This is what his character arc this season has been about so far, kicked off by the encounter with Reinhard that left him so humbled. Even though Subaru tries to reassure him that he's plenty strong, he isn't content with being less than the strongest. His talks with Mimi helped him gain some peace and perspective, but her injury that he couldn't prevent shattered that confidence all over again. His contest gets put on ice for the moment though, gross, fleshy ice, as Coppola's decoy breaks down and falls on him, giving away that she is somewhere else. The government building, in fact, where she has already infiltrated and made her way to Cruz's sickbed. Al is supposed to be guarding the place, but whether something happened to him or she impersonated someone to get by is unclear, nor do we know what else she might have been up to in this building before calling on Cruz. I assume at least that she sought her recent victim out to see what's become of her handiwork, to find the answer to what kind of ugly meat scraps she turned into that was denied her when Subaru managed Cruz's escape with the dragon's assistance. Coppola is in for a surprise, as the odd incident where Subaru absorbed some of the cursed blood has improved Cruz's conditions. I don't know if that will send Coppola into a dangerous rage, or if she'll find it so curious that it actually diffuses the threat. Now let's visit Regulus, who managed to go a whole episode without claiming any violations to his rights. There were other violations instead, like to his ego when Reinhard's sword refuses to be drawn, and to his brilliant scheme when Reinhard refuses to stay dead. Actually, Reinhard's presence seems to change how Regulus behaves. Ordinarily, he's so self-assured that he's going to win that he casually monologues in a relaxed posture, gives his name and gets bent out of shape if he doesn't get a response in kind, and stands still with full confidence that his shielding power, whatever it is, will keep him from harm. Instead, he never gives his name at all, never seems to use the shield, and maybe he can't for some reason, and ends up threatening his wives to try to stop their attack, which seems rather desperate compared to every other time we have seen him in a fight. Though, one behavior remains the same, that Regulus never considers himself to be in the wrong, always considers himself to be the victim. He's holding his wives hostage, but proclaims it will be their fault if any of them die, that they will have used him as a tool to murder them all. This is a classic abuser mindset, that it's some other person or situation to blame for the harm they cause. Taking responsibility for initiating that harm would be to admit fault or mistake, and Regulus will admit no such thing. Emilia rejected his marriage, and yet we see him talk about how he was right not to take her as his wife, instead of saying that he was wrong to propose it or that she was wrong to refuse him. By the end of his tirade, he's claiming Emilia has toyed with his pure heart, transforming himself into the victim while actively holding her up by her throat. Now we can add this to the pile of other instances where he tries to make himself the victim while actually the aggressor, such as when he destroyed the caravan at the beginning of Season 2, and add it to other examples of his inability to be wrong, such as when Pandora tells him to calm his anger and his reaction is to try to kill her. It's a consistent pattern, but for him to continue to behave this way, even when Reinhard has him all out of sorts, tells me that this is a core part of his personality. To put it succinctly, Regulus is a weakling. He can't handle being wrong, he can't handle being at fault, he can't even handle it if he thinks he's being disrespected. His requirement that his wives be virgins now has me wondering if it's just an insecurity at being compared to other men. Even Emilia bringing up a man's name at all bent him out of shape in the previous episode. Thinking about it like that, invincibility is the perfect ability for Regulus, since he can't even withstand a mild reprimand. He's too weak to handle even a little hurt or blame, so a power that protects him from harm is a perfect complement to his fragile ego. Unfortunately, that power is not going to be overcome with character analysis, and so Subaru and Regulus have the sophisticated plan of trying everything they can think of to break his invincibility until something sticks. Fortunately, Reinhard has quite the bag of tricks himself, as we now add divine protection of the Phoenix and some telepathy to the mix. Subaru now has a fellow member of the Return from Death Club. I'm a little curious as to whether Reinhard can just accumulate these abilities without limit, or if he can only use a certain number at a time, or there's some kind of trade-off for cooldown. But really, the inability to draw the sword whenever he wants is the only limit I can remember ever coming up. Oh, and by the way, let's go ahead and consider that Chekhov's sword. The attention we paid to it this time, and the prominent framing with Emilia carrying it, convinced me that we're gonna see that bad boy come out at some point this season. Speaking of Emilia, I love that when Regulus holds her up by her neck, she doesn't just go limp and await rescue. She tries smacking him across the face with her little ice dagger. Later, when Reinhard rushes Regulus, she has the wherewithal to toss the weapon his way, which I think is what enables Reinhard to use the ability he does, which destroys the back of the church. It looks like the same one he used against Elsa, which also channeled through a weapon, and Emilia was there to witness that as well. And although it's brief, I appreciate that Subaru and Emilia got to their little exchange where she had faith he would come, and he had faith that she would have faith and wait. That nicely ties up with the two of them went through in the previous episodes, where even though they wanted to rush to the other side, they knew there were circumstances around them they had to take care of first, and trusted the other to make appropriate choices in the meantime. They seem to have gained a lot of confidence in their relationship and trust in one another during the 1-year time skip, so it is nice to get that little nod. Last to mention is that it seems this Regulus beatdown is a show that they're going to take on the road. His willingness to use his wives as hostages, and their unwillingness to evacuate without permission, means they have to keep him away from the church. And Reinhard has a creative solution to changing venues. Doing so enables a change-up in how the story is presented. This is kind of low-key brilliant on our storyteller's part, as the wives' obedience and Regulus's flippancy towards their lives is well established, and so moving the fight elsewhere feels like an organic, even inevitable choice. What it means in storytelling terms, though, is that we're no longer bound to a half-dozen separate fights in separate locations like when the episode began. Instead of a bunch of completely distinct storylines happening simultaneously with no interaction, we now have the opportunity for Subaru's crew to run into another group, and that could cascade into further shaking up how the battle is arranged, and now a much more dynamic story seems to be unfolding. That's more interesting anyway, but there was a real problem for this particular story to have everyone spread out, a problem called return by death. Subaru hasn't died and reset since the second episode of the new season, and it's possible he won't die again. But since he can only see what's going on in his one location, we in the audience can meta-reason that he won't die so long as we witness whatever is going on elsewhere. Mixing the groups up where he can potentially witness their plans go awry makes it more likely a reset might occur. It doesn't guarantee it, but the story is better when we aren't sure whether or not the timeline we are in at any moment will be the one that sticks. So, specifically having Subaru and the party on the move can restore this uncertainty and the resulting tension to the series. Bravo. That then leaves Gluttony, of which there are indeed two. Or rather, no less than two, as Otto shrewdly puts it, and Lai's reply that he's on the right track rather convinces me that there will turn out to be a third Gluttony as well. We've been theorizing there would be a third ever since Roy appeared, as their star names seem to be linked to the great maw beasts, and there are 3 of those. For now, just 2. The one Otto runs into somewhere in the middle of the city, and the one that the Candid Alliance knows about and has sent Julius and Ricardo to face. Now, even though Julius knows better, he gives his name at the beginning of their assault. Why would he do such a thing? I think it's a problem of identity, somewhat similar to Garfield's problem. Julius is the perfect knight, strives to be the perfect knight, and giving his name comes with the territory. He tells Ricardo he intends to give it his all right from the beginning of the fight, and so he either means to win, in which it won't matter that he ignored the warning, or he means to die trying, and it would be shameful for a knight to die without having observed the proper forms. Even Elsa the assassin gave her name at the start of combat with Reinhard and Garfield. Now, I still suspect the story will repudiate this dedication to proper knightly behavior, going back to the season premiere when Subaru told him he didn't need to be the perfect, courteous knight all the time, referencing the period when he went by Yuli instead. Subaru says things might work out better if he had that kind of flexibility. Maybe this will be the start of that repudiation, maybe it comes later, but there's already a different problem. The last thing that Roy says to him. If you listen to Roy's line, you'll hear him call Julius Ni-sama.
Ni-sama.
And we'll see Julius start in surprise. As we learned back in the premiere, Ni-sama is what his younger brother Yoshua calls him.
Ni-sama.
The same Yoshua that we haven't seen since that episode, or heard from, or about, or even mentioned, as though everyone has forgotten he exists. This being Gluttony, they probably have. And while Julius pulling that look of troubled recognition seems contradictory to having forgotten his brother, the story already has precedent for this phenomena. Ram had forgotten Rem when her name was eaten, and so her memories of fighting the maw beast in the forest had been altered to leave her sister out. But when Subaru makes a crack about throwing her off into the distance as a decoy, she also gets a troubled look, and later says it bothered her, almost as if something like that had really happened before. That tells us that the name-eating power isn't absolute in erasing memories of the victim, and so I think that is what's happening. Hearing Ni-sama is familiar, and Julius doesn't know why, just that it is troubling to hear. What I think is more troubling is the implication. Roy calling him Ni-sama isn't a reference to Yoshua, it's more like he temporarily is acting like Yoshua, or channeling him, or something. When we flip over to Lai, we get a similar example. He is looking for Subaru, the hero on the radio broadcast, but not because of the broadcast. He says that dear, beloved hero is supposed to come judge him, which is very similar to what Rem said about Subaru back at the start of Season 2. She also refers to herself as the caretaker of her one and only love, and here Lai talks about that weak, fragile one who seems in desperate need of support. But this seems to go beyond just quoting Rem. This is more like he is experiencing what Rem would experience thinking about Subaru, like he's channeling Rem, or letting himself become her for a moment, and Lai, disturbingly, appears to take pleasure in the sensation. What is going on here? Sometimes in this series, when there's a mystery, I like to imagine the worst possible answer I can think of. It's why I guessed Teresia might be the female cultists. That was the worst possibility I could come up with, and it's not even the worst version of that possibility, as she is a puppeted corpse, rather than someone who faked her death to join the witch's cult or some similar kind of betrayal. When we first ran into Lai this season and noted his first-person plural speech, we didn't yet have the example of Roy as a possible explanation. And so the worst possible answer I could muster was that Lai was effectively a collective. The people who had both names and memories eaten were now actually part of him, souls trapped or even assimilated into his own. There is some circumstantial evidence in the case of Rem. When Puck describes what has happened to her, the eating of both name and memories, he says the result is that nothing is left of her but an empty shell. Later that season, Subaru will introduce Ram back to her, and she'll later claim that Rem's existence itself is a blank. So, if Rem's body is a shell and her existence a blank, where is the person of Rem? Once we met a second, and theorized a third gluttony, we had a far less horrifying answer for this little habit in their speech. But now that I witness how Roy and Lai are acting, I feel like the worst option is back on the table. There's another gluttony insight we gain this time, one far more relatable. Lai hates merchants, or at least the merchant mindset, or maybe the concept of viewing everything as fungible. I'm not sure how specific or abstract his complaint actually is. It's nice, though, to see that he has a berserk button just like every other archbishop. Regulus gets keyed up at perceived slights or breaches of protocol, Coppola has her whole venomous rant about love and physical attractiveness, and Sirius gets rather, heated when it comes to Amelia, while Betelgeuse, Archbishop of Sloth, used to get very upset about, well, sloth. In Lai's case, I don't know if this is just a bad experience, like Felt suggests, or something more philosophical. Someone suggested in Discord that this might explain why the white whale so often attacked caravans of merchants, which I kind of find hilarious. Whatever it is, it's a nice addition of complexity to the Archbishop we've spent the least time with, which makes me optimistic that he could be a more interesting character than he has yet appeared to be. Final thought now, and it's related to one of the first, that Anastasia seems to be hiding something from the others. When asking myself what the worst answer to that might be, here is what I am pondering. Did she set Yoshua up on purpose? His errand was to deliver a letter to the main gate not too long before the cultists assault the city. She implies the whole matter concerns gluttony, and lo and behold, he appears to have been eaten. What's more, the errand was originally meant for Hetero and TV, and like Yoshua, they have a sibling in Mimi who would have remained by Anastasia's side just as Julius does now. Was she running some kind of experiment or tactic to split those with sibling bonds? Perhaps having learned of a possible counter or cure that such family relationships may enable? Is this in fact why Julius and Ram both have moments of fleeting recognition? Because they have a sibling bond to the one who was erased? I know she would still forget Yoshua, but I imagine there's a way to prepare such that she'd still know that the plan went through. Similar to how they can count the white whale casualties, by knowing how many people are supposed to be in each unit compared to how many they can account for. I don't have any good evidence for Yoshua's fate being deliberate on her part. I just strongly suspect she knew the cultists were going to attack and win, which is why she gathered the other candidates to the city. Subaru accuses Anastasia of thinking like a merchant more than once, and Gluttony seems to really hate something about merchants, which is a further entanglement between them. And maybe it's pure coincidence that the errand passed from one set of siblings to a different set. But Priscilla sure thinks that Anastasia has some reason to feel guilty towards Julius, and this was the worst thing I could come up with. Alright, that's all. See you next week.